how's it going there? Wes here, and today I wanted to talk about one of my favorite all-time genres of music, which is going to be 80s hardcore punk rock. So it had a big movement. 80s hardcore really influenced a lot of music, especially metal. Without 80s hardcore punk rock, a lot of the metal bands that we love today wouldn't even exist. So you got to give a big nod to punk rock. So I'm going to go over my top 10 favorite hardcore punk albums from the 80s. So nothing from the 90s, strictly from the 80s. And it's all going to be hardcore punk. So stuff like The Clash, Sex Pistols doesn't count. So this is the more aggressive type of punk rock that we're going to focus on today. So I've set a few rules here. The main rule is that I'm not going to have multiple albums from the same band. Otherwise, you would probably see a runaway. We're not going to do that. So it's going to be one album per band. I don't care if they're American, if they're British, if they're from Samoa. I could give a shit. If it's good, it's going to be on the list. That's all that matters. Now, another rule that I set is I'm going to allow some compilation albums, because when I got into hardcore punk and first listened to it, that was before the new resurgence of punk from the early 90s or the mid 90s happened. And a lot of these albums you could only find in compilation form. They weren't re-released until there was a bigger demand for punk after the huge explosion from Green Day and The Offspring back in 94 and 95. And that's pretty much it. Those are the rules. I mean, it's strictly from the 80s, no 90s, no 70s. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get to it.
Number 10.
Suicidal Tendencies. So Suicidal Tendencies released their self-titled debut album, Suicidal Tendencies, in July of 1983 on Frontier Records. Now, this album, in my opinion, was pretty groundbreaking. It kind of started the crossover movement. It had a little bit of a metal sound to it, where you had Grant Estes on guitar playing metal-like leads. A lot more faster music. The tone of the guitar sounded a lot more metal. But the bottom line is this album is a lot of fun, it's funny, it's aggressive, and it's real.
I'm a suicidal failure. I gotta have some help. Have suicidal tendencies, but I can't kill myself.
Mike Muir was a freaking genius at the time. He was like 18, 19 years old when this album came out, just a teenager. And he really just expressed himself through his music, which a lot of punk rockers and other alienated kids were doing those days, and he had the perfect outlet. Now, all the songs were written by Mike Muir, I'm assuming in like his bedroom where he was depressed and felt isolated, because some of the songs really hit home. We can relate to as teenagers with problems, teenagers who felt alienated, teenagers who had issues with their parents, with authority. So Mike Muir wrote all of the songs, and some of them are just plain brilliant. And the first one everyone's going to know or mention is Institutionalized.
Me and your mom, we noticed lately you're having a lot of problems. And you've been going off for no reason. And we're afraid you're going to hurt somebody. And we're afraid you're going to hurt yourself.
I mean, can I get a Pepsi? Just one Pepsi? Who hasn't heard that line? Now that song was pretty ingenious if you ask me. Basically, Mike is just telling a story over music. It's great. I mean, and then the chorus picks up all fast and time to mosh.
I'm not crazy. Here's the vision. You're the one that's crazy. Here's the vision. You got to be crazy. Here's the vision.
Suicidal Tendencies had a huge following in LA. They even got banned from playing in LA because their shows got so freaking rowdy. And if you've seen Suicidal Today's, their shows are still pretty hardcore. Now, there's other great songs on there, such as I Saw Your Mommy, which is pretty funny. And then Mike tries some singing, which he got really good at later on, with the excellent I Want More.
'Cause I want more.
Now, one of my favorite songs is Subliminal, which is just excellent. It's catchy as hell. It's really fun to play on the guitar too. And then you have I Shot the Devil, which was originally titled I Shot Reagan, shortly after Reagan got shot by, what was his name, John Hinckley, some nutball.
I shoot Reagan! I shot the die! I'm gonna shoot you! Can you have your mind? You're running at me! Your angel's voice! You're too proud! But you're inside!
I Shot the Devil, which was originally called I Shot Reagan, and it was rumored that the FBI actually approached Suicidal and asked them to change the name of the song. I don't know if that's true or not. That sounds kind of out there. Who knows? Slayer even covered Memories of Tomorrow, which for some reason was only released on the Japanese version of Undisputed Attitude, which is Slayer's cover album of hardcore punk that was released back in '96. Why it was left off on the American version beats me, but I downloaded it off of Napster like 15 years ago, so I'm good. If you're a fan of hardcore punk and you haven't picked up this album yet, do so immediately. It is excellent. And Suicidal actually re-released the album. They re-recorded it and everything 10 years later, in '93, and they titled it Still Psycho after all of these years. Except this time they had the amazing Rocky George playing lead guitar, who basically played Grant Estes' leads note for note. Production is excellent. I actually like that version better than the original version because it sounds so good, and Mike's voice just got so much better over those 10 years. So definitely check that one out. Suicidal, number 10.
Number 9.
Oh man, number 9. And I love this album, and the fact that it's so high up on the list is just going to tell you what other good stuff I have on here. But it's Murphy's Law, the self-titled album released in 1986. Now this album is just so much fun. Now, Murphy's Law comes from the New York hardcore scene with, from other bands like the Cro-Mags, Agnostic Front, and so on. Now, while Murphy's Law was big in the New York hardcore scene, attracting the skinhead crowd, all that good stuff, they were actually very different and very diverse compared to other New York hardcore bands. Murphy's Law was all about having fun and partying, and that's one of the reasons I like these guys so much. I remember the first time I ever heard this album at an old punker friend of mine. His name was Pippi. Over at his house, he played it, and I was just cracking up laughing. I'm like, these guys are from New York, aren't they? And I've been hooked ever since. I mean, Murphy's Law is excellent. So like I mentioned before, Murphy's Law is very diverse. They incorporate ska in their music, and they're just having a goddamn good time, and you gotta love that. They sing about smoking weed, they sing about drinking beer, and the lyrics are fucking hilarious. I mean, I love the song Sit Home and Rot because I myself tend to be a bit lazy, kind of a homebody. I like to stay home and just rot, and I love it. I enjoy it. This song really hits home and has some great lyrics.
Sit at home and play Atari, smoke my black Rastafari. Sit home and ride, sit home and ride.
And like I mentioned before, Murphy's Law likes to party, so let's hear it for beer.
Why don't you drink fucking beer? What's the matter? Are you queer?
And probably my favorite song on the album, because this song always cracked me up, and it sounds funny, but it's really catchy as hell. It's Crucial Barbecue. Basically a song about throwing a big party at Jimmy's house, Jimmy G the singer, while his parents are away.
Lots of herb and a keg of brew. We're gonna have a crucial barbecue.
Now Jimmy G is short for Jimmy Gestapo, which apparently was the most evil name Jimmy could think up of at the time. Now, Jimmy G is pretty big in the New York hardcore scene. He's really good friends with Vinny Stigma from Agnostic Front. And back in '86, the same year that this album was released, Jimmy actually went on to the Phil Donahue show when Donahue was having a special on punk rockers and all that good shit. So you can imagine how that went.
I know everybody in the whole peanut gallery here. You know, we're just a group of friends. You know, we go to shows and like friends. It's friends performing for friends. You know, it's like Agnostic Front's friends with Murphy's Law. You know, they're the audience sometimes, and we're the audience sometimes.
Now, when I heard Murphy's Law, the album was actually re-released with their second album, Back with a Bong, onto one disc. So I actually listened to both of the albums at the same time. That was all that was available to me. But both Back with a Bong and Murphy's Law have both since been re-released. And you can find the albums relatively cheap. You're not going to be spending an arm and a leg for them. So I recommend picking them up. I still haven't picked up each individual album. I will at some point. But they are available. Before, when the album was out of print, you'd be paying close to $100 for these albums. So thank God someone re-released them. But I highly recommend Murphy's Law. It is so funny. It's so much fun. Jimmy G's voice is just great. He makes me laugh, and he's a really fun guy. I've hung out with him and smoked weed with him several times. The guy is a riot, dude. He's so much fun. Check out Murphy's Law, and all of Murphy's Law's albums are all pretty good. Check it out.
Johnny's got a problem and he's out of control.
Number 8.
Got a problem and he's out of control now. Johnny's got a problem and he's out of control.
All right, not a whole lot of people know about D.I., and if you don't, here's your chance to learn. So D.I. is fronted by Casey Royer on vocals. Now, he used to play drums for Social Distortion and later the Adolescents before he broke away and wanted to form his own band. Now, D.I. hails from Orange County, so they're from that scene, and they actually influenced a lot of Orange County bands, such as Pennywise and The Offspring. Now, D.I.'s album, Horse Bites, Dog Cries, was recorded in '85, released in '86, and from start to finish, the album is just excellent. It is awesome. It's fast. Aggressive.
You're in the hospital and you're hurt. And here comes your favorite pervert nurse.
Now, D.I. on this album had two very talented guitarists, the Agnew brothers, Rick and Alfie. Rick, who also used to play with the Adolescents, and who actually has more recently played on the newest Joy Killer album, which I recommend as well. But the dual guitars are just awesome, and it's great songwriting. One of my favorite songs, Euthanasia, is just fast as hell. And it is addicting. It's just an addicting song. But there's all kinds of awesome songs on here. And there's some really good standouts. I mean, all of them are good. There's no filler. But there's some very good standouts. And a lot of these songs, you can hear how they influence bands, like I mentioned before, such as Pennywise and The Offspring. Now, you have songs like Hang 10 in East Berlin. That's an instant classic.
Master Race Mayhem on the beach. The Fourth Reich is within our reach. It's within our reach, so...
I had a friend over the other day who doesn't even listen to punk, and I put the album in, and she was really digging Johnny's Got a Problem. So that song is pretty awesome as well.
We used to look up to you. Johnny's got a problem. He's out of control. He's got static on the brain. Out of control.
No Moms is funny. I like that song a lot. It cracks me up. And then Imminent War is catchy as hell. That song gets stuck in my head like all the freaking time.
Imminent war. Time to see the lights. Imminent war. It's you, my friend, that's gonna bye.
But their most brilliant song on the album, and it stands out from all the rest, it's just one of a kind, is Spiritual Law.
You can go with the men don't lie, why do they cry? Men don't lie, why do they cry?
Now, Royer wrote this song. They actually had a different version, an earlier version of the song on their previous album, Ancient Artifacts, which isn't nearly as good. A lot of the lyrics were changed around for this newer version. This newer version is the definitive version, and was actually, once again, covered by Slayer on their awesome Undisputed Attitude album that was released back in '96. I highly recommend that album as well. So DI still does tour now, but they're not really a big band. They haven't released a new album in like 9 years, but they're pretty goddamn good. This album is hands down a classic, and you can still find it easily online. It's not going to cost you a lot of money. So pick it up. DI, Horse Bites, Dog Cries.
Number 7.
Alright, so we have our first collection here, and that's going to be Subhumans EP LP. Now, this album is one of the first punk albums I had ever listened to, and I was hooked immediately. It is so good. It is so diverse. It sounds so different than what a lot of other bands were doing at the time. Now, Subhumans is straight up British punk. I've heard people say that the vocalist Dick sounds like Eric Idle, which he kind of does.
If life seems jolly rotten, there's something you've forgotten, and that's to laugh and smile and dance and sing.
They are just amazing. I mean, they have some ska elements to them, some reggae elements, and all of the band members are just fantastic musicians. So to me, they're like the British version of the Dead Kennedys. Their lyrics cover politics and just society as a whole. Even though they're from another country, it's still relatable. So this album is made up of 4 of the Subhumans' first EPs. The first one being Demolition War, which was released in 1981 and has excellent songs. It has 4 songs on it. They're all excellent. Then you have Parasites and you have Animal come right afterwards. I mean, and then the next 2 EPs, both from '82, are Reason for Existence and Religious Wars, which the very last one being Evolution. Now, some more standout tracks include So combined, the 4 EPs just create one hell of a fucking ride. And while it may not be as good as their second album, From the Cradle to the Grave, which is just a freaking masterpiece, this collection is my favorite just because it's the first thing I heard from the Subhumans, and it's really fucking good. So I definitely recommend this one. Anything from the Subhumans is good, but EP, LP for sure is the way to go. And I would recommend EP, LP to be the very first Subhumans title that you pick up. You'll get into it, and then you'll be ready for more.
Number 6.
I can see it in your eyes, all the lights and alibis. I can see it in your eyes, all the lights and alibis. Happiness together.
Alright, so another great album, this one used to make me chuckle a lot too, is Circle Jerk's Golden Shower of Hits. Now, this is not a greatest hits album. It's just the name of the title because it's freaking clever. And it's hilarious. Just look at the album cover. I mean, this album is funny, it's smart, it's sarcastic. It's the perfect album for 1983. Some of my favorite songs have to be When the Shit Hits the Fan.
We all have to die when the shit hits the fan.
Coup d'etat.
The president not like. He shoots or puts behind bars.
Red Blanket Room, and of course one of the greats, Bad Words. I mean, the lyrics to this song used to always make me laugh. I fucking love this one too.
Use them when you're happy. Use them on your gal.
And like I mentioned before, Red Blanket Room, a song about rehab. It's a little bit different for the Jerks, but I definitely like this one as well. It fits perfectly with the album.
I hate Drano, what you do. He shot junk, she drank blue.
But my all-time favorite song on this album has got to be the medley at the end, the Golden Shower of Hits, where it combines 6 classic songs together, which basically tells the story of 2 people falling in love, rushing into marriage, having kids, and then getting divorced. It is hilarious, and it is still by far my favorite song on the album, even though they didn't write it, but the way it's presented is just so funny.
Then along comes Mary, and then she wants to give me the kicks, and what the kick can give me bigger memories. Why do birds suddenly appear every time you are near? Just like me, they long to be close to you.
Thinking of you working like I have no time. Looking forward to a girl like a beauty light. Loving spaces stuck together, make the sports ignite and a fun.
Our little boy is 4 years old and quite a little man. So we spell out the words we don't want him to understand.
Now there's other classic Circle Jerks albums too, like the first 2 albums, Group Sex and Wild in the Streets. I highly recommend those as well. But this one seems to be a little more refined. It seems that they got their sound down a little more, which unfortunately would change drastically with the addition of 2 other members later on and the decline of punk rock at the time. So this was Circle Jerks' like last hurrah at the peak punk time before the punk crash started. So definitely check this one out.
Thanks a lot.